I just wanted to say a few words about a ministry you might not know exists here at Epiphany. Our pastoral care ministry encapsulates a lot of different things. Prayer, delivering flowers to people, meals when people need them, so all sorts of things, taking Eucharist to people. But something else that we have is we have a grief ministry, and what that is that when somebody's experiencing a loss of a spouse, a close loved one, and just needs a conversation partner, not a therapist, not a doctor, but just somebody, a companion in grief. Karen Somerville heads up that ministry working with me. And so what we do is we have a group of people that have had some training, and then what we do is we kind of match people. And so we match somebody with a companion to walk with them. And it might be a couple of months, it might be up to a year. It all depends on what somebody needs. So just know that that ministry is here. And if you need it or you know someone who needs it, just reach out and let me know. And we'd be happy to help find a partner for somebody to talk through that grief. I'm going to hand it over to Karen Somerville at this point to tell you about another resource we have for those who are grieving, and then to introduce our speaker, Mark. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. Yes, so there's been a recent addition to the campus here, and it's the Grievers Library. And some of you may be familiar with the boxes around town, the little free libraries. Well, this is the same concept, and there are actually, I think, 8 or 9 little there are grievers libraries that are in the form of a little free library around town. Ours here on campus is actually in the fireplace room. It's on a shelf that's to the right of the fireplace. Sometimes it is obscured by the vibe or the whiteboard, so you have to sometimes peek around there, and we'll figure out a way to make it more visible. But the Grievers Library it's not a lending library. It's one where you can take those books. They are yours. They're replenished. And we have Dabney Yautz to thank for arranging for this to all happen. And I'd encourage you, when you leave today, to actually go down there and check it out. And if you are grieving, or if you're going to be visiting a friend who's grieving, take these books. They don't need to be returned. They're yours to keep. And now it's really my pleasure. Well, I should also thank Dabney Yautz for inviting our guest and speaker here today, Mark Lucero. And I believe we really are truly blessed to be able to have him today to speak about his book. Mark is a licensed mental health counselor. He's the founder of Pathways Counseling. And his wife, Sandy, she's here, yes, she's here today. And they drove here from, well, took the ferry too, from Whidbey Island. And so thank you for coming over here. But Mark is, in addition to being the counselor, and he works specifically with people who are experiencing loss or grief, but most importantly, he's the author of this book. And this is a gem of a book. The title really says it all. It's What to Say When You Don't Know What to Say, Loving a Friend Through Grief. And I think we've all been in that situation where we want to reach out to a friend, but we're just not sure. And sometimes we delay because we think, well, we're afraid we'll do maybe the wrong thing. This book will give you the confidence to actually meet with someone. And we will have, there are some for sale in over here, and we will, yes, they're for sale over here. And we also will we'll have multiple copies in the Christie House Library for you to, these would be on loan. These are not the kind that go into the Grievers Library. But I would also very much encourage you to buy your own copy, because when I got mine, I read through it, and I was making notes, and it was such a rich and yet simple, kind of well formatted. So then a few weeks after that, I was going to be seeing a friend who had lost her husband since the last time I had seen her. And I went back to this book, and I was able to pull it out, look at the specific chapters, the specific sections, and just feel like, I can do this. And so I would encourage you all to borrow it, but also to get your own copy, because you will be grateful to have that when you are experiencing the the desire and the need to go and see someone who has just experienced a profound loss in their life. So thank you, Mark, for being here.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? All right, good. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. We live in a culture that would really like to avoid the topic of grief or death or even strong emotions. So, to be invited to talk about this topic and have so many of you show up to hear about this, it really lightens my heart. And thank you, Karen, also for your kind words about my book. It is exactly why I wrote the book. When I'm working with clients all the time and I talk to their families or their support people, and the thing I hear over and over again is, I just don't know what to say. I really want to help, but I'm really not quite sure what to say to them. So it seemed kind of obvious, we need a book, just kind of break it down and what's helpful, what's not helpful. So I hope you'll find that useful. Talking to Grief by Denise Levertov. Ah, grief, I should not treat you like a homeless dog who comes to the back door for a crust, for a meatless bone. I should trust you. I should coax you into the house and give you your own corner, a worn mat to lie on, your own water dish. You think I don't know you've been living under my porch. You long for your real place to be readied before winter comes. You need your name, your collar and tag. You need the right to warn off intruders, to consider my house your own, and me your person, and yourself my own dog. I love the line in that poem, you think I don't know you've been living under my porch. I'm certain there are a majority of people in this room who understand how grief can live under our porch. Kind of hangs out there. There's an expression in grief care that grief waits on invitation. People say that time heals all wounds, and that really isn't the case. Time's a necessary condition for healing, but we have to do something with that time, something very particular. When I was in my I think I was 36, when my dad died. He had bone cancer. And for the first 2 or 3 months after he was diagnosed, I didn't call him. I just sort of dropped off the radar. I didn't make any contact, anything like that. And finally, my dad rings me up, Mark, I haven't heard from you in quite a while. What's going on? And you know what I said? Dad, I didn't know what to say. I don't know what to do with the fact that you're dying. And, after his death, it became one of my great regrets, that I chose the common path of avoidance in the face of something painful. And so I learned some things from that, and then I went on to become a therapist, and then went on to specialize in grief and loss counseling. And but that always stays with me, that I kind of wished I had done that better. And so I do hope that with this book and having the opportunities to get out and talk and educate about this topic, that we can do this better, that we can support the people who are grieving around us in a way that's meaningful and helpful. So I want to begin with what I call the golden rule of grief support. And it's sort of like starting from the general, and then I'll get into specifics. But if you're thinking about moving alongside somebody to support them in their grief, the golden rule asks this question: does what I'm about to say invite my friend to move toward their grief or away from their grief? So if you think of coming up beside someone, you're going to encourage them or offer some care, does what you're about to say invite them to move toward their grief or away from their grief? And in case you're unsure, we're trying to gently move them toward their grief, right? Because we live in a culture that wants to avert our eyes, wants to avoid. My work as a grief counselor is to very gently move people toward something that hurts, right? And so I'll often tell my clients, this is going to hurt, but it won't hurt you, right? So I want to begin by defining a few terms, just two, and those are grief and mourning. So these are two words that often get used interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing, and in fact, it's really important that you know the difference between grief and mourning. And if there's one thing I hope you leave here today with, it's a clear understanding of what the difference between grief and mourning is. So grief is an experience. right? Grief happens inside of me. If I'm grieving, it's the thoughts I'm having, it's the emotions I'm experiencing, there's bodily sensations, there's mental fog. So all of this stuff happens inside of me and you would never know it, right? Grief's invisible in that sense. Mourning is action. So mourning is any action that we take in response to that internal experience of grief. So the most common form of mourning is tears, right? So if a tear comes down my face, you might begin to guess that I'm sad or maybe I'm grieving. So think of grief as sort of the symptoms, and mourning is the treatment or the remedy for grief. So what I do in my work is I find very creative and specific ways for people to actively mourn their grief, because that is the path to healing. If we don't mourn, if we don't find a way to give outward expression to the grief that we're feeling, then it's called carried grief. We just carry it along with us in our lives. And then we have multiple losses over the course of our lives. So I think of it like having a pillowcase, and you have a bowling ball, so you stick it in a pillowcase and throw it over your shoulder, and then you have another loss, and you keep putting these bowling balls in the pillowcase. And we move through our lives with what I believe is an epidemic of carried grief. And so we're all hunched over and we're encumbered, and we're not moving through our lives, upright and with open hearts. So we must learn how to actively mourn, how to give full expression, and there's a million ways to mourn. You can write in a journal, you can sing a song, you can visit a gravesite. Anything that I could sort of videotape you doing that's outside counts as mourning. And so the more creative we get with finding ways to mourn, that allows us to move through the process of integrating loss, right? That's our goal, is to integrate the loss into our hearts. It's not to get over it. It's not to get past it. But to integrate the reality of what's happened and find a home for it in our hearts so that we can live our lives open-hearted again and unencumbered by the loss. I do want to also invite you, if you have any questions or if you need clarification, just get my attention. I always think I'm making sense when I'm talking, but that's not always the case, so feel free to get my attention if I've said something that's unclear. So let's talk a little bit about some of the myths and misconceptions about grief. And there's a lot of them, and we won't talk about all of them, and you'll recognize some of these. So the first myth is, I mentioned earlier, that time heals all wounds, right? We know that's not true. We know time's a necessary condition, and a lot of time, right? When we have a profound loss, it's not 2 weeks bereavement leave and you go back and you're fine, right? Grief is a very slow healing process, much longer than our culture generally allows. A second myth or misconception is that if somebody's expressing really strong emotion, if they're breaking down, if they're really having a hard time, then they're not doing very well, right? That they're really not strong. Almost the opposite is true. I am much more concerned about people who come through the door to see me and they're very stoic and sort of bottled up, not showing emotion. I'm much more concerned about folks who don't have the ability to access, name their emotion, and then give them expression, which is what we call mourning. So strong emotion does not equal weakness. It frightens us as a culture. We don't like to see people falling apart or wailing, or crying or whatever comes up. But it's a natural response to grief, and we need to learn to create space for that in our culture. So then the other side of that coin is that not showing strong emotion equals strength, right? That's also a misconception. If somebody's got it all together and look how well she's doing, she didn't even cry. That's not true. The fourth one we covered also is that grief and mourning are the same thing. Those are not synonyms. You now know the difference between grief and mourning. A fifth misconception is that grief moves through linear stages, right? We just got to go through, a lot of people use Kubler-Ross's 5 stages, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Get through all those 5 stages, you're done, you're gold. Doesn't work like that at all. Grief is messy. Navigating loss is anything but a straight line, anything but linear. The model that I like to think about in navigating loss is more of like an upward ascending spiral, a very slowly ascending spiral. So think about you're walking along the surface of the earth, you have a profound loss, someone you love dearly dies, you fall through a hole 30 feet down, you're knocked around, you're disoriented, And then so we begin there the process of actively mourning. And as we do that, we very slowly begin to ascend back up from the subterranean where grief takes us. And the reason it's a spiral is because grief is recursive. It goes over and over the same territory. People who are grieving often say, I just can't stop thinking the same thoughts, or I keep telling the story over and over. And that's natural. We need to allow people to tell their story over and over again, which is a form of mourning. And as they do, they very slowly ascend that upward spiral. So I like that model better than sort of the straight line linear stage theory. And even Kubler-Ross at the end of her life sort of corrected folks and said, that she was talking about the stages of dying, not the stages of grief. It just sort of got mapped on. And then one final misconception is that if we avoid the reminders of the loss, then that will ease our pain, right? Sometimes you hear what I consider sort of bad advice, take the pictures down, put away the photographs, remember the golden rule of grief care. Are we trying to move toward our grief or away from our grief? So, taking the reminders away moves you away from your grief. And at the same time, we do have to dose ourselves through loss. We can become quickly overwhelmed. It's the reason why we need so much time to heal, because our brains kick into denial mode. And it's a healing aspect of our brain to protect us from overwhelm. But what it means is it stretches out the recovery time. It's a long convalescence after loss. Any questions about myths or misconceptions? Yeah.
I just have a thought about something that happens to me, and it seems so surprising every time.
Yeah.
But I can be having a normal day, and then all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed with these thoughts and tears.
Yeah.
And it's been forever
Yeah.
since these things happened.
Yeah. Yes.
So it surprises me, and I think it's not normal.
It's perfectly normal. It's very good news. We call those grief bursts, where you're just walking, and they normally happen in the most inconvenient place. You're on aisle 7 in Safeway, you see their favorite spaghetti sauce, and you're undone, right? But the grief burst is just a reminder that the love is still alive. It's very much alive in you. And it's a natural part of navigating through loss is those grief bursts. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Sometimes embarrassing and definitely painful, but a reminder that love is still there, which is the goal. Yeah. Okay, so the title of my book is What to Say. Chapter 7 is What Not to Say. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we probably shouldn't say to our grieving friends and family. And I will confess I have probably said every one of these, and probably a lot of you will recognize and remember or think of having said some of these things. But it's important to know, maybe why some of these things aren't helpful. So I'll talk about a few of those. And I always begin with, if you can avoid it, never say anything that starts with the words "at least." Okay? At least you had 40 good years together. At least you're young, you can remarry. At least he didn't suffer, right? And these are always said with the intention of care and support, right? It's always well-intentioned. But the reason we don't want to start with things that say "at least" is because what that is saying to the griever is you should look on the bright side. You should think of something positive. And, it's a kind intention to have. But for the grieving person, most of the time, especially in acute grief, it's not even possible for them to consider looking at the bright side yet. So the "at least" statements tend to kind of rankle, they kind of land sharp, like a poke. So avoid those statements whenever possible. I'll talk about a few more things that we probably shouldn't say. He's in a better place, he or she's in a better place. And, why would I not ask? I mean, we're in a church, right? So theologically, I think a lot of us hope and imagine that there's a better place after this life. But why would I ask you not to say that? The reason is because for the grieving person, the better place, the best place for that person to be is alive right back here with me. There's no better place, right? I mean, heaven, lovely, but I want them back. And so they're in a better place generally doesn't tend to be a helpful thing to hear. Here's one of my I was going to say favorites. It's really my least favorite. God won't give you more than you can bear. Whew. wow. When you're in the midst of profound loss, it feels unbearable. It feels like, I don't know if I'm going to survive this. So to be told that God's taking it easy on you right now, wow, okay. So yeah, one of those things we probably shouldn't say. Another one is kind of similar. Everything happens for a reason. It doesn't. So many things in this life defy explanation. We could list a whole bunch of things, but everything doesn't happen for a reason. And one of the things that grievers will need to do is to find meaning, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the 6 needs. But one of the needs, the 6 needs of grievers, is to search for meaning. And so they're going to be asking those questions. Why did this happen? And we'll talk a little bit about that. Another one that we probably shouldn't say is, I know just how you feel, right? I mean, it comes up a lot, right? I know just how you feel. My sister died too, so I know how you feel, right? We don't. Every person that comes through my door for the first time, I do not know how they feel, and in fact, they're the expert in the room on their grief. And I am the student. They're going to teach me what their grief is like, right? So we really shouldn't suggest that we have any sense, really, of what they feel, other than generally probably sad, but we don't know how they feel. And it doesn't feel good for a grieving person to make their experience sort of generic, like, oh, it's just like yours. And then one more is, give me a call if you need anything, right? It's a generous thing to say, and I know it's well-intentioned. The reason I ask people not to say that is because as a support person for someone in grief, you need to be the one who's proactive. You need to be the one who's taking the lead. Instead of putting the onus on them, hey, call me if you need anything. We know they need something. We know they have very specific needs as a grieving person. So we want to be the one who's initiating. And so I prefer something like, I'm going to call you tomorrow morning and check in, and then call tomorrow morning and check in, right? Instead of asking them to call you. So what do grievers need? There's 6 central needs that I want to talk about that we can, each one of these, we can very specifically come alongside grieving people and support that need. So the first need of every grieving person is to acknowledge the reality of the loss. And so that seems like pretty obvious, right? We were all at the funeral. We know this happened. But acknowledgement isn't just a thing that lives up here. And this is why recovering from loss takes so long, because we have to get beyond just the sort of mental assent or the awareness in our brain that this happened. It has to migrate down into our heart to where we can live along with the reality of it. And so grieving people need to over and over again acknowledge or say aloud, they died, or tell the story of how they died. And they have that need, and we can support that need by invitation, by asking them questions, by inviting them to talk about the person that died. So first central need is to acknowledge the reality of the loss. The second is grievers need to feel the pain of the loss or any emotion. They need to feel the full range of emotions and be given safe space to give expression to those emotions. And this is where it gets tricky with support people, because that's for many people, it's a really uncomfortable thing to sit beside somebody who's weeping or who's wailing, screaming, But it's a very specific need to feel that emotion. And it is directly correlated with healing, that they're able to name the emotion and then give it full expression. It helps them heal. The third central need is to remember the person who died. And, most of the work initially in grief care is looking backward. We're looking backward in history. We're telling stories. We're inviting them to tell stories. And they have a very real need to do that. So it works out really well, because the way you support somebody remembering the person who died is to ask about them and also to speak their name. We need to hear their name spoken. The relationship we have with people that die our relationship doesn't end because they die. Right? We continue to love them. They remain a part of our lives, and they remain an important part of our lives, and we cultivate and nourish that relationship going forward through memory. So they have a need to remember that person, and we can support them in that. The fourth central need is to develop a new self-identity. And so what this generally looks like is often like with a spouse death, the tasks are sort of divided up among spouses, and when one of them dies, there are things that they never had to do before, right? My mom, when my stepfather died, she had never filled her car with gas. Didn't know how to do that, right? That the pumps are all digital, and where's the card go? She'd never done it, right? So very tangible things like that, we can move alongside people, teach them how to pump your car full of gas, teach them how to balance a checkbook, teach them how to cook a meal. So all these sort of new identity things that come along often are a result of the loss of the partner who did those things. So really sort of tangible care can be given along this dimension, and if you have particular skills, teach them how to start a lawnmower. It's very practical stuff and much needed by grieving people. It's one of those places where they feel alone, and it really amplifies the sense of loss because I don't know how to fill my car with gas, So we can really support people along that need in particular. The fifth central need is to search for meaning. Every grieving person is constantly asking why questions. Why did they die? Why did they die in this way? Why did they die now? God, why did you allow them to die, right? The why questions are a very natural part of navigating loss. And, the tricky bit is that most of the time there really aren't very satisfying answers to the why questions. And so the way we support this need is to make sure that they are feeling welcome to ask those questions. Most of the time, the best answer you can give is, I don't know. I don't know, rather than try to speculate or guess. I don't know why this has happened, but I know you're struggling with it, and I know you want answers and are really looking to try to understand this, and I'm going to sit beside you as you do. I'll be here, right, as you ask these difficult why questions. So searching for meaning. The world changes when we lose someone we love, and it doesn't return again to the way it was. So important to allow them to ask these why questions. And then finally, the sixth central need is to be supported for a very long time. Much, much longer than I say we, I'm talking about North American culture, because we don't do this well, generally. We don't do grief care very well. But grievers need support for many, many months after a loss, and sometimes years. And so, it's pretty obvious the way we can support that need is to communicate that we're not going away, that we understand this is a long convalescence, and that they're going to need care for a very long time. And we'll stick with them as they navigate that. But really important to remember that, there's a verse in the Bible that said, "Blessed are those who mourn." And I think we like just to add to that quickly. Blessed are those who mourn quickly, because it makes us itchy, it makes us uncomfortable. Those words aren't in the original, so just so you know, blessed are those who mourn, and we should bless them as best as we're able. So finally, I want to talk about a strategy for offering support that I came up with. It was just sort of a weird hallucination I had one day, I'm not sure, but I called it stop, drop, and roll. So, stop, drop, and roll happens when your clothes are on fire, right? So you need to take immediate action. And that's how I want you to think about grievers, this is a situation that's really, really serious, right? If you were walking down the street and you saw someone whose clothes are on fire, you wouldn't say, "Hey, give me a call if you need something," right? That doesn't work. So, yeah. So stop, drop, and roll. It starts with stop. So when you think about stop, what I want you to know is that if you encounter somebody that you know is grieving, they've suffered a loss, you stop. You don't walk on by. This is not a situation that you can avert your eyes from. They need help. They need your care. So stop is the first. Drop is to drop from your head to your heart. So instead of trying to think, okay, what's the wise thing for me to say? What's the smart thing I should say right in this situation? I want you to just pause for a moment, drop from your head to your heart, and drop into that place of compassion and empathy and care for your friend before you initiate support, right? So stop, don't walk on by, drop from your head to your heart, move from a place of compassion. And then roll is an acronym, R-O-L-L. So stands for reach out, so R-O, reach out. And that means that if you're going to support somebody in grief, you are the one initiating action, right? You're going to take the lead. You're going to bring the casseroles over and in the good dish so that you make a second visit to get the dish, right? So Bring the food is incredibly important for grieving people. It is, it's just like the most clear sign of love and support that we can feel is to be fed. And so bring the food. Even if their freezer's full of lasagnas, it's okay, bring the food. It's a wonderful thing to do. So reach out. We're going to be the initiators. The first L in R.O.L.L is listen. That's 90% of the work is listening. And it doesn't even work. I describe my job, and my wife knows this, is I get to hear love stories. I go to work and I listen to love stories. People tell me about these people that they love so much, and I get to be introduced to these people who I've never met and get to meet them. It's lovely. So listen, right? Our job is to listen to what the grieving person wants to say and needs to say. Not complicated, really, at all. And then the final L is learn. So reach out, listen, and learn, remembering that we are the learners. We are the ones who need to be taught. What's the contours of your grief? When does it show up? Is it mornings? Is it evenings? What's it like for you to be without this person? So reach out, listen, and learn. So that is stop, drop, and roll, right? Stop, drop from your head to your heart, reach out, initiate, listen, and learn. So I think we probably have, I want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers, and then before we're done, I want to just read one paragraph from the conclusion of my book. But maybe we could just move into Q&A for a little while. Anybody have any questions or, yeah?
I'm wondering, because I've experienced it myself, and as a person who has been in grieving from time to time, I see it in people trying to support me. The worry about intrusiveness. How do I ask for the story? How do I say, do you want help? I mean, it's just a really, it can be very unnerving, right? To figure out whether it's appropriate to approach or...
Yeah, I know. I have old tapes from childhood in my head that say, don't be a nuisance, don't be a bother, right? But
you got those tapes too.
Yeah, I do, yes, yeah. But yeah, we want to always be gentle, right? Of course, we don't want to be reckless, but grieving people, they have a need, a very real need to talk about their loss. They do. So, we're inviting them to do that. And of course, they can always decline. I have little pins that I give out to some of my clients that say under reconstruction. And so they can wear those out because, grievers are invisible in lots of ways in our culture. We don't wear black anymore. We don't wear the armband to signal to our community that we've had a loss. So these little pins allow them to move through their community, and somebody might ask, well, you're under reconstruction. And if they feel up to it in that moment, they can tell their story, which is a form of mourning, which helps them heal. So I guess, I get what you're saying, that it is awkward and you fear you're going to tread on something really personal. It is, deeply personal. But I'm going to say 95% of the time, grievers will welcome being asked, questions or invited to talk about the person that's died. So go for it. Yeah.
Follow up on that question is,
Yeah.
I've heard different recommendations. One is just go to their house and knock on the door, because if you call, they might say no, but they really need to see you. And the other one is give them a call first and ask if, would this be a good time? What is your thought on that?
I think I like the second one a little better. I mean, I spend a lot of time in my pajamas, so I think a call, just to give a heads up, I'd like to come for a short visit, so that it doesn't feel like they're going to be too much is required of them. I think that's a respectful thing to do. Yeah, and it may also vary by the relationship you have with that person. If you're super close and, hey, we're pajama friends, then you just show up. So maybe there's some way to adjust around that. Yeah.
For years, my parents always teach me that when you hear someone dies, reach out right away. And so I've got this habit. When I get text messages or something, so-and-so died, I'll pick up and call the person. And I've had a lot of people tell me, that sounds horrible. You're really pushing yourself. Like they just found out themselves or whatever. And I've always thought that, to your point, they don't have to answer the call. And if they answer the call, they wanted that call. Do you think
I totally agree, yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
Another thing that came from my childhood is to not use euphemisms, like say,
Yes.
Sorry, your father passed on.
Yes.
But you use the word die.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, we try too hard to sanitize, the reality of what's happened. The first need is to acknowledge the reality. Nowadays, it's rare to have an open casket funeral or even to have the body of the person at the funeral. It's a celebration of life. We need these signs to remind us, to help us to begin. The funeral is the beginning of the mourning period. Nowadays, we think of it as sort of the end. Okay, the funeral's done. We're done with that. It initiates the mourning period and lets the community know, okay, I'm going to need support now for a long time. So yeah, I think it's just really important to not use euphemisms. Just be very clear. It's okay to say, I understand that so and so died, and yeah, I agree. Use those words. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you named those things that we shouldn't say, those things that are very typical that we impose on grieving persons.
Mm-hmm.
But what came to mind for me is or the question I have is what do you think when someone imposes those kinds of things on themselves or resorts to those maybe easy answers?
Yeah.
I can imagine, and I felt this. I think particularly interacting with older people grieving.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a younger person.
Mm-hmm.
They themselves will say, "Oh, they're in a better place."
Yes.
They themselves
Yes.
again, I said resort. Maybe that's insensitive, but what do you do? How do you navigate that?
It's always fair game for the grieving person to say those things. Always fair game. We don't ever have to correct them, but for the support people, not so much. But yeah, a grieving person can say, I know they're in a better place. That's great. That's where they're at in that space. We respect that always. So yeah, always fair game for them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was just wondering, Mark, as we think about people we've lost that affects kind of the whole family, right? The spouse, maybe the grown children or even younger children. I'm always struggling too with how to do that kind of outreach to young people who've lost a parent early or something like that. Is there anything you'd shift or suggest that, because you talk about the society embracing moving on. I think that generation gets particularly pressured into moving on in some ways, just because of where they are in their lives and get swept up in other activities and all of that. So I just welcome your ideas about how to reach out to young people.
Yeah, so younger people, there's a really great book that I love to recommend. It's called Finding the Words, and it's basically breaks down in different developmental ages and what language you can use with children of different ages around death and dying and grief. It's really it's Dr. Alan Wolfelt wrote that book. But that's a really good resource to have. But the rule is that if they're young enough to love, they're young enough to grieve, right? Or old enough to grieve. If they're old enough to love, they're old enough to grieve. Mm-hmm.
I just want to follow up on that, and I am a great supporter of and a volunteer for Safe Crossings Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Which is an organization here in Seattle. For those of you who don't know, it provides cost-free grief counseling for children and teens who have lost a sibling or a parent. And it's a wonderful resource, and we actually support it through our service and outreach here. The organization, Safe Crossings Foundation, has received at least 2 grants to support their work. And so if you know of someone, and I'll talk to Kate for her, if in case her son's friend has siblings, it's just a great resource, and they provide somebody to come to the home, and they work with anticipatory grief, they work with the families, and they do a camp every summer to bring those children together. I've heard of them.
That's wonderful. Nice. Yes.
You've
Oh,
given us
sorry.
a lot of what not to say, but many of us, or at least me, have said many of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me a recovery?
Like if you slip and say one of these? It's funny. It's a spoiler. But in my book, talking about the at least statements. If you start out with something at least and you catch yourself in the book, I say, finish it by saying, at least I can stop myself from finishing this sentence. Alternatives are helpful. Like, what should I, how do I initiate a conversation? So mostly it's invitation to talk. Tell me about John. Tell me about Sarah. What do you remember? How did you meet? In any kind of invitation to tell any story is a wonderful invitation for them to begin to mourn and to tell you their story. Yeah. And back there, yeah.
Well, I have a friend who recently lost a younger sister, but this friend is older than me. She's been family friends for years, but she doesn't believe in God. And one time I mentioned God a long time ago. She said, "Don't call me again."
Mm.
And she called me to tell me that her sister had died.
Mm.
And so I haven't responded since. I'm afraid to.
Mm.
And maybe I just shouldn't. But I
Mhm.
feel like I would like to, but she's a total non-believer, always has.
Yeah, yeah. Might be good just to take that head on. I know that last time I talked about God and that bothered you. I can assure you that I won't do that, but I am very interested in knowing how you're doing since your sister's death. Just kind of bring it up to clear the air, maybe. Yeah, I think we want to allow them to have, to lean into whatever space they need to. It may not look like ours.
Yeah, I'd like to talk with her, just even not
Yeah.
about that, because I think it's over for her. I mean, it's totally
Mm.
over. But it can't be really, can it?
Probably not. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, we're on the topic of tangentially went into faith and God. My mother, when she died, she continued to go to church until she passed away a couple of years ago. But my dad passed away quite young. He was in his early 60s. And my mother was angry with God for quite some time and talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew what to say. I guess I was maybe a good place. I was listening.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't trying to argue with her or anything like that. But what, we're a church here. What is the appropriate thing to do? Is it just to listen and try to be there and let them work through it themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I hope we have a robust enough God that we can be angry, at God, and that we can allow people to be angry at God and to find their way through that, to renegotiate, the terms, because that's a pretty common thing, for people after a loss is, one of the meanings of the word bereavement is to be robbed or to be torn in half. So, we often feel like we've been robbed and, well, who's in charge of all this, So it's pretty common that anger at God comes up. So I like to leave wide space for that. And it's one of those emotions that feels uncomfortable, but boy, does it want to be expressed. And so, yeah, I leave room for that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think about, and do you have any suggestions for other things to say than how are you doing?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question, because grievers do not like that question, right? How are you doing? And the reason they don't like it is because it's too vague, it's too general. They're not sure if you know about their loss if you ask how they're doing. So I like to say, how are you doing with your grief today? Or even, how are you doing today? But generally, I like to add grief in there so they know I'm asking about this loss. I'm not just saying, hey, happy Tuesday, how you doing? So be pretty specific if you ask a question like that. It's a good one, thanks. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking with specificity, just to your point of just letting them know. I understood that your sister died.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Mm-hmm. Thanks. I think I've been avoiding you. Sorry.
Just as we don't really, we don't do a great job of supporting, acknowledging our grief and our mourning, I think similarly we don't do a great job acknowledging and supporting caregivers. And sometimes, caregivers in particular are grieving while their loved one is still with us.
Yes.
I've experienced this myself.
Yeah, so we're talking about anticipatory grief, I think. Like a caregiver knows this person is declining and will die. And anticipatory grief is, I think of it like an iceberg, you know. It's sort of the 10% above the surface. There's some anticipatory work we can do around loss, but it really isn't until the loss happens that we really can get to work around what the impact is on me. But I think it's good to be sensitive to that, to be aware, to just, again, say aloud, you know, that you know, I know that you're grieving, and I know that you see what's coming, and I want to be mindful of what your needs are around that.
Maybe last question?
Okay, thanks. Last question. Who wants it? Yes.
All the hands go up.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, my sister lost her son, and he died by suicide. And even today, it's just hard to talk about it, and because she kind of shut herself off. And so, in a case like that, where someone loses a child by suicide, like what can you say? I mean, you can be there, but it's like there aren't even words to express what you're feeling, because you know, it's a relative. You do feel their pain, but you know, other than just hug them and hold on to them. But.
Yeah, pretty good place to start, yeah. But suicide loss is complicated by nature, right? It's a very complicated type of loss. It's also a disenfranchised loss. It's one of those griefs that you know, people don't know what to do with, so they generally don't get well supported around. So we have to recognize that. That means we need to come forward even more so than maybe around, you know, a loss that was expected. Often suicide deaths are violent, you know, so it's another component that complicates the loss. And certainly it's an unexpected death. So those three things make it tricky to approach. But I think the thing is to remember the 6 needs that every griever has are the same for a suicide death. And so you still move toward them along those lines in the same way. I hope that's helpful.
I know we still have questions in the room, and we also have another service in just a few minutes. So I would like us to thank Mark for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.